Listeners, beware. This podcast contains themes of the macabre and does not shy away from the details. Our content is graphic and our language is colorful. We might not be your cup of tea, so listener discretion is strongly advised. Hosted by two best friends with a proclivity to decipher the deeply demented minds of murderers.
Welcome to Season 3, Episode 5 of The Killer Tea. On today's episode, we will be discussing Vasili Komaroff.
The Wolf of Moscow.
We are your hosts, Chelsea
and Christina.
Welcome back.
We're on schedule
again.
I set the scene last time, Chelsea.
I will set the scene. As we all know, serial killers often wear different disguises because, after all, the best predator is one that you never knew considered you to be their prey. Sometimes they're a charming, attractive ladies' man.
Ted Bundy.
Or a God-fearing clergy member.
There's too many to mention.
A sweet, loving husband and father. Gacy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's the one that sticks out to me.
A successful businessman.
Again, a lot of those.
Yes. A doctor, a nurse, or more often than not, even a kind and gentle neighbor. Vasili Komaroff's neighbors described him as many of those things, and up until the day he confessed to killing no less than 33 men in 1921 and 1923 did they suspect anything differently.
Komaroff was born Vasily Ivanovich Petrov in 1871 in the rural Vitebsk region of Russia. Vasily was part of a large family where he was one of as many as 6 brothers and 6 sisters. While some may have considered him a fortunate child to have both parents in a war-torn era, his home life was anything but loving.
His mother and father were dirt poor and violent drunks. His father, Vasily Sr., was 55 at the time of his birth in 1871 and would regularly beat his mother in a drunken rage. Because the family was so poor, the children were sent to work in lieu of an education. By the age of 12, Vasily already had one such job working for the family's landlord doing manual labor and chores. This left the boy completely illiterate.
By 15, he had inherited his family's fondness for alcohol.
Shocker.
Sometime in between his teenage years to his later adolescent life, his father would die tragically after falling into a canal in a drunken stupor, drowning in the water. Vasily Sr.'s death would be one amongst the many self-inflicted tragedies that seemed to haunt the Komaroff name. As a matter of fact, Vasily wouldn't even be the first and only killer in his family. During a drunken altercation while at the factory where he worked, Vasily's own brother would go on to accidentally or intentionally, it really isn't described, kill his boss, resulting in a life sentence in a Sakhalin prison. I was trying to get more information on this because it was in the 18 and 1900s and I couldn't get a lot of family names. But yeah, he made the local paper for getting in a fight with his boss and killing him, as you do.
Needless to say, trauma played a large role in young Vasily's life. If we look through the lens of 2021, the damage of physical and emotional abuse on a child is, to be frank, insurmountable. Couple that with no healthy attachments, constant poverty, and tragic death.
Yay!
This is how you make a serial killer.
This is how you make a serial killer. Well, we've discussed serial killers who have grown up in poverty before. We haven't really taken a deeper look into the developmental and psychological implications that extreme poverty can have on a child. A lot of the serial killers that we've discussed, Anthony Sowell and all of them, they grew up in an extreme poverty with large families.
Right.
So we've tapped into some research done in the Office of the Socioeconomic Status for the American Psychological Association for the following information on the impacts of poverty on children. So unlike sometimes when we will actually read quote for quote from articles, I tried to layman's terms as much as possible because I didn't want to seem like we were droning on. But disclaimer, Chelsea and I are not legal practicing psychologists. But Chelsea has a bachelor's degree in psychology, so it's worth some sort of merit, damn it. Okay. As we know, the early childhood years are critical for forming healthy attachments and hitting developmental milestones. These experiences are essentially the bread and butter of what makes us grow into healthy, reasonable, and functional adults. We cannot stress enough how childhood is the most essential building block stage for how a person will develop and interact with the world around them.
As you can imagine, having several adverse childhood experiences greatly impacts our brains' physical and emotional development. It doesn't take a neuroscientist to figure out that our brains are not designed to live in a constant state of stress. You heard that right. We should not be living in a constant state of stress. But apparently, it does take one to show us how fucking important it is to not being an abusive alcoholic shithead to your kids. Adverse childhood experiences, also called ACEs, refer to negative childhood ecosystems like living in impoverished or disadvantaged neighborhoods, instability from ever-changing living situations, and constantly moving house or school, experiencing food insecurity or hunger, being subjected to physical, sexual, and emotional abuse or neglect, and exposure to drug or alcohol abuse.
These adverse childhood experiences cause what is considered toxic stress in children, which is the prolonged activation of the stress response system. In short, extreme poverty and abuse never stops affecting children in the short or the long term, and at any developmental stage in their youth. Like what Chelsea said, your body, your brain is not designed to live in fight or flight.
Even
constantly.
As an adult,
yeah,
it's not good for
yes,
you
even
to
as
live
an
in a
adult.
constant state of stress.
This toxic stress means kids are at a higher risk of chronic health problems, mental illness, substance abuse, domestic violence, and even cognitive impairment.
In the case of Vasili Komaroff, his adverse childhood experiences are undoubtedly what plagued him into his adult life. He, in fact, had next to no childhood, and I'm sure what little childhood he did have was ruined with his parents' neglect and alcoholism. And then society took this damaged kid and put a weapon in his hand and taught him how to kill. Legally.
Because he joins the military, the Red Army of all situations. So now, as you can imagine, life in the 1870s and the 1890s Russia was a little rough.
You don't say.
To say the least. The Russian Empire was going through some growing pains, and if you can call it that, under the Romanovs. Even though their population had doubled in size and industrialization was at its peak, insurrections, revolutions, assassinations, and all-out war were kind of part of everyday life for Vasili. Russia was still largely a rural country. Most of his family was farmers. Most people he knew were farmers. And everyone was encompassed in a civil war, which was like a class system. I had to refresh myself on the Red Army versus the White Army. Mm-hmm. That was like, I remembered White Russians, the drink. Then vaguely had to go back through and was like, okay, what was this all about again?
This just makes me think of Anastasia.
Yeah.
Well, ha and a hi, yeah, and then I geek her, sir. Sorry.
Nerd is showing hardcore right here. Needless to say, the Civil War and the class system was tearing the country apart.
By the time he was of age, he had been conscripted to the Russian army. Komaroff would live to see combat in the Russo-Japanese War, where he served 4 years. During this time, he traveled all over the Middle East, eventually marrying his first wife at the age of 28, which honestly
It's very late.
Is late for
Very
this
late
time
from this
period.
Yeah.
Like it so frequently does, alcoholism and overspending ruined Vasili's first marriage shortly after it began. The fights over money were frequent and, like his father before him, violent. However, it would not be Komaroff's love of the bottle or the fact that he and his wife were in financial ruin that would be the end of their marriage. Instead, Vasili's marriage would come to an end in 1911, completely unbeknownst to him, when his wife died tragically from cholera, and she was alone.
And why was she alone? Because he was in prison. He was in prison because he had stole apples from the warehouse that he was in charge of. It's not as if he was at least at this time, die-hard, horrible criminal. Sounds like he was starving.
Trying to feed his wife?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm just inferring. He was 40 at the time that this happened. 3 years later, he would marry again. She was a widow with 2 young children from her previous marriage, and once again, it didn't take long for his second marriage to become haunted with the same afflictions as his first. His second wife lived in constant terror of her new husband, suffering from the frequent physical abuse. Still a piece of shit. Maybe he had stolen food to try and feed his family, but also you're still an abusive piece of shit that's spending all your money on alcohol. Maybe that's why you don't have any. Maybe.
After fleeing Riga with his new wife and children, Vasili would spend time working in another warehouse before ultimately volunteering to join the Red Guard during the Russian Civil War in 1917. There was a class war in Russia, and as an illiterate, uneducated, and poor man, Vasili resented the White Army, who were the anti-communists that believed in a non-separatist state as being rich and privileged people that looked down on him. After learning to read and write, Komaroff would actually ascend through the ranks. Apparently, his superiors in the military praised him for his dedication and sought to promote him time and time again. He would go from a mere volunteer to a platoon leader commander. It is here where we first truly hear about Vasili's affinity for murder. But I just want to draw attention to the fact that here is yet another serial killer killed in the military.
Yep, that is a... Someday, guys. I know we say it every other episode. Someday.
One day.
We will actually do an episode on serial killers in the military. So his new job title required a different type of ruthlessness. Point-blank execution of the captured White Russians. While his commander encouraged him to maybe get somebody else to do his dirty work. You don't have to be the one that actually kills the guys, Vasili. Get one of the other helpers to have them do it. Vasili was like, that's a waste of time and resources. Why bring somebody else in when I've got zero qualms going ahead and killing them myself? That's exactly what he did. He's actually quoted as saying, "Why did I need help? I could handle the business myself. The enemies were tied up, so they could not run and could not hit back."
Oh my God.
All right, guy, just super matter of fact about shooting people point blank in the head. Okay, here we are.
There's also mention of him having a celebratory drink after each murder.
I feel like he has a drink after everything, though, so this doesn't shock me.
Komaroff also had no problem robbing dead men either, frequently searching the dead servicemen's pockets for anything worth a coin. Whatever he found, he would use to pay for his boozing. Something else came about from his new job as executioner. When he was drinking, he discovered he had a thirst for blood. He bragged about how once he was drunk, he would want to kill. Eventually, Vasili was captured by the enemy. He feigned a new last name and tried to play to their sympathies, something he never found room in his heart to do for them. In an act of mercy, the commander spared his life, believing that Vasili was likely forced to join the Red Guard against his will. Of course, Komaroff played along and was even treated well. The lieutenant in charge of his capture would give him cigarettes and even plan to release him, believing in some ways Vasili was a soldier only by force.
He admitted later, "Not true at all. I went to the front line in November of 1917. I wanted to beat all of the rich people, the bourgeoisie. I hated all of those educated people who finished high school and can play the piano." He said the young lieutenant seemed well educated and would listen to music on his gramophone. Personally, I think this reminded Komaroff of the man's perceived privilege over him in an unbelievable twist of fate. Vasili would make him pay for this act of mercy.
The Red Army infiltrated the base where he was held captive. Komaroff found the young lieutenant and while barefoot had him lined up against the wall where he would be shot point blank. And Vasili would be the one to do it. Vasili was not ashamed of his ruthlessness and was in fact very proud of killing the young man. The Red Army awarded him a deed of merit and a gun, which he displayed on the wall of his home for all to see. The gun, however, he later sold for booze money. So,
no good deed goes unpunished, as they say. After the war, his life of crime would pick right back up where it left off. He would find a job working as a wagoner at the evacuation center in Tesnatravak in 1921. After the Russian Civil War, soldiers, officers, and thousands of civilian emigres who feared for their lives and did not want to live under communist rule immigrated from Russia. It was called the Great Exodus, and it's estimated 2 million people left Russia in the post-revolutionary era, which was the purpose of these evacuation centers that Vasili worked at. And I wanted to throw that all in there because without any sort of context, you're like, why is he in an evacuation center? What's
so weird to me that, like, he worked in an evacuation center after the military. I don't know. That just seems such like a shift.
They wanted them out of there.
True. It just, he went from, like, killing to, like, helping.
Yeah. This was actually pretty profitable for him, but he would still manage to squander that money on, take a guess.
Booze.
Oh, how'd you know? That's crazy.
It was here at the evacuation center that the first steps of Vasili's gang murders would take place. Now, I don't think we've done a male gang murder.
And he is very specifically a gang murderer.
This could be a first.
Yes. So while at the evacuation center, Vasili noticed one of the wagoners had a brand new harness. When the worker was distracted, Vasili stole the harness and disguised the action behind loading 5 large sacks of peat into a wagon, and then he just took off. On the way, he randomly picked up an old woman hitchhiker and was like, here, I'll take you to your place for X amount of coin. And she paid it, and he made some extra cash, kind of doing a good deed. After dropping off the old woman, he headed to the horse section at the Smolensk market. While there, he spotted a Romani woman, Grisha, selling a man a horse that looked worse for wear. By his own estimation, Vasili felt that the horse was better suited for the slaughterhouse, and if this man couldn't tell the difference by looking at it, he was either extremely gullible or naive, but he had money in his pockets. Those were just the sort of characteristics Vasili wanted to exploit.
Seeing the man put an old harness on the horse, Komaroff approached him with his new stolen harness and offered it up to the man. His plan was to win him over with his act of kindness and persuade him into having a celebratory drink, aka get him drunk and vulnerable. And well, I think you know what happens after that.
What happens, Chelsea? Do they hang out and have a really good time and become best friends?
Totally. The man was incredibly thankful for Vasili's kindness and fell right into his trap. Vasili went back into work and told them he was sick, made a pit stop for some tobacco, where he also found the time to steal new leather gloves, and then he and the horseman were off to a party. Komaroff would describe the man as being taciturn or quiet, but he did seem to enjoy letting Komaroff talk, so that's exactly what he did to bide his time. He wanted the man to trust him and let his guard down. He told the horseman his war stories and even mentioned that deed on the wall he received from the Red Army. But soon the man was ready to go home and headed out into the night. While Vasili was trying to catch up with the man, he took just a second too long to react because a large group of partygoers separated the two and his moment was lost. Komaroff spent the rest of the night in a foul mood that he did not manage to kill the man to take back the new stolen harness and all of the money in his pockets. In fact, he was grouchy about not killing the man the next morning too. Not upset that his brain went, hey, let's kill this dude for pocket change and a mangy horse. But that he ran out of time to kill him. That's when it hit him. Duh, I'll get lucky again and more people will come along for me to murder and rob.
Yay!
Yay!
As you do. Which is exactly what happened. Well, kinda. He woke up, decided, yep, killing is what I do now.
As you do.
As you do. And then searched his house for any kind of alcohol his wife may have kept hidden, drank it, and then was like, shit, I need more booze. Time to kill somebody for booze money.
As you do.
Apparently, it was super urgent that he get wasted because he ended up borrowing money from his next-door neighbor and promised to pay him back. Which I guess his neighbor was one of Komaroff's old landlords that he used to steal from, but the landlord was kind of low-key terrified of him, so he never pressed charges.
I'd probably be terrified of him too. Shit.
Yeah. The neighbor actually did lend him the money, though. While at the Smolensk market, Vasili spotted a sturdy young man in his 30s from out of town looking for a workhorse. Now, horses were slim pickings in their Providence because the war had just ended and over half of the nation's horses had been sent off to said war. And it was also mating season, so people really weren't willing to part with a good horse unless they were in dire straits. Mm-hmm. After observing the young man, he could tell this guy knew his horses, but was having absolutely no luck purchasing what he needed. So he decided to use this to his advantage. With the promise of a horse, he lured the man back to his home. During the ride there, Komaroff once again would lead the conversation with stories of his childhood and his veteran status, all in an effort to appear more sympathetic. I'm trustworthy. I had a rough childhood. I fought the enemy in the Civil War. Once at the house, he could tell that the young man was starting to be suspicious. During his attempt to disarm him and make him like him with a polite conversation, Komaroff actually stumbled over one of his lies, and the man called him out on it. When he initially lured him into this whole scenario, he was talking about a male horse that he had. And then as he's bullshitting and forgetting the lies that he's telling later on, he mentions a mare. And the guy's like, wait a second. You said a stallion. I thought I was buying a stallion. You don't get those two things confused. And he was like, no. I meant I have a stallion. My neighbor, the landlord, used to work for him. Great guy. Literally, this is like how he's giving him a spiel. He has a mare. So what I was inferring was, if you don't like my stallion, you can take the mare. Okay. But so this guy's like, suspicious, but I'm here now. Let's go through with this.
Komaroff was able to cover up his lie and decided to offer the man vodka to try to appease him some more, but he declined, stating that he did not drink. Vasili's home was derelict and disgusting, and it became obvious the young man was ready to leave pretty much right there. So in a hurry, Vasili pretended to get papers for the aforementioned horse, but came back with a hammer and bludgeoned the man to death from behind. Komaroff stripped the young man of his clothes, which he planned to sell, and stuffed his still-warm body into a sack. The young man's name was Igor. He was only 30, with a loving wife named Anastasia and 2 small children that asked if Daddy would bring them home sweets from the market. Igor would never return. His family fell into financial ruin without him, and his father, who had been the one to send Igor to the market, would die from guilt and grief a year later.
How fucked up is that?
So sad.
I did a little more research into Igor, and there wasn't a whole lot, but it did basically say that his family struggled during the Civil War, but then they were able to have a really profitable farming season, and he was able to essentially bring his family back from poverty, and they were doing really well.
And then that bastard just kills him.
Son of a bitch kills him, and now his family just
is
falls
torn apart again.
How it just.
Well, Vasili Komaroff would repeat this exact same scenario with 32 other men for 2 years after Igor's murder. 32 more men in 2 years.
His MO was essentially spot the victim in the market, entice them with the promise of a too-good-to-be-true trade, liquor them up, and then murder them from behind with a hammer, or slit their throat, or strangle them with wire. In that first year, Komaroff committed at least 17 of the 33 murders. He would sometimes hide their bodies in garbage sacks around his house. bury them, and then send them off to the dump or throw them in the Moscow River. He wasn't exactly great at the whole disposal process.
No, he's just leaving them around.
And we mentioned it a little bit here. And the next thing we're going to talk about, Sophia, his second wife, the smell. Even if they were out in the stables, like...
Rotting bodies have a distinct smell.
We are literally wired to, if we smell a human body, that our brain just freaks out.
Right.
Because that's supposed to be big no-no.
Well, I mean, that's our, biological alarm system.
So there's bodies around your house, in your stable, and you're not noticing anything? Suspicious. Murder had become a very profitable business and would be for 2 whole years. It's also unclear what caused his second wife, Sophia, to realize what was going on. Maybe could have been the garbage bags of dead bodies in the house. But she ultimately became an accomplice to Vasili's heinous crimes. We don't ever get the full picture of what she did. It doesn't detail it in a confession, but we know that she was upset initially when she discovered them, but then somehow came to terms with it and was like, here, I'll help you. It's hard to say. She was in an abusive relationship. I don't know.
Who knows? In 1923, after several men had been reported missing, an investigation was launched into the disappearances. It was then that they discovered the remains of 21 men in discarded sacks of garbage. They began to set up undercover stakeouts, taking notice that the sacks containing bodies always seemed to arrive on Thursdays and Saturdays in the dump. Despite their efforts, however, they were unable to discover any new leads and the case began to run cold. Until Vasili Komaroff decided to expand his criminal activities into illegal alcohol sales.
Because, when I'm out here killing body after body, disposing them in my house,
I just want to draw more attention to myself by starting an illegal alcohol trade.
Yeah, that's logic. It's crystal clear here. Great choices. In March of 1923, a tip about Vasili potentially dealing in back alley illegal alcohol dealings led investigators to the Komaroff home. The investigators were able to search the premises where they ultimately found the remains of one of his victims buried underneath the hay in the horse stable. Vasili fled the house through an open window, and he was actually able to evade police for several days. He was eventually caught and arrested on March 18, 1923, in the Moscow Oblast. Police began to interrogate both Vasili and Sophia, as well as question witnesses in the market and even friends of their family. They learned that despite the fact Vasili and Sophia were violent towards each other, and that Vasili tried to kill his 8-year-old son via a hanging, they had an ultimately happy marriage. Well, yeah.
What?
Okay.
Oh, okay.
That sounds great.
Totally makes sense. Those who did not know Vasili well, but saw him out and about, described him as a kind and pleasant man who often smiled at them. Observers at the market did note that he would often arrive at the horse traders' market without a horse and leave with a potential customer every Wednesday and Friday. Remember, the bodies seemed to always show up on Thursdays and Saturdays? Wonder why.
Strange.
Vasili Komaroff admitted to murdering 33 men during the police interrogation. He did not remember the names of a single one of his victims, and while he led officers to the spot where there were supposed 12 buried men, only 6 were ever recovered. Most of his poor victims' bodies would never be recovered and the remains never returned to their families.
Police said that he spoke of the murders very matter-of-factly, completely unperturbed by what he had done, and relatively unremorseful. While he may have killed for monetary gain, he only averaged 80 cents a killing. Now, you would think, okay, that has to be like a couple hundred, at least $1,000 in modern money, right? No, it's $20 in today's conversion from Russian money to American money. $20 a person.
Totally worth it.
That's the spending power. That's fucking nothing.
No.
Nothing. It seems as though he was very uninterested in living in prison, and his only request was to ultimately just be killed. Unfortunately, he got his wish. And I say unfortunately because if that's what he wanted, he should have gotten the exact opposite of that, personally, in my opinion. He and his wife Sophia were found guilty and given the death penalty by firing squad on June 18th, 1923. Because of his predatory nature, the citizens of Moscow dubbed him the Wolf of Moscow.
And that's all she wrote, folks.
That's all she wrote. I know this one is really short, but there was some things that I picked up here and there. One of the things that the investigators said in their interviews with him was that he would get worked up and upset about his wife going to jail or potentially dying, and he would get
his children.
He would get upset about that and cry.
But was just so cold about the murders he had committed.
I wonder whenever... A, he had all that trauma as a child, and B, not just he was a soldier, but he was an executioner. So he was given the right, the responsibility to legally kill. I cannot imagine that all systems are firing at the correct capacity when
Well, no. I mean, I'm sure he became very desensitized to killing, and...
He went from petty theft of, like, food and gloves...
to full-on murder.
To full-on murder. And that is a lot of fucking men. 33?
In 2 years?
In 2 years. That is a lot of people.
He was very busy.
He must have woken up very early in the morning. But Dahmer scale. How do you rate Vasili on the Dahmer scale? Now, bear in mind, sometimes he bludgeoned them to death. Other times
he slit their throat or choked
their throat.
He's like a 9 out of 10 for me. Like he's
pretty brutal.
Pretty brutal.
I agree.
And it's not even the way he killed them. It was the amount.
The amount and just not being...
And giving no fucks.
I do think it's interesting that he didn't give a fuck, but he would get emotional about his kids and stuff. Because remember when we talked to Melissa, and one of the things that we asked her was when she was speaking with Dr. Phil, and he said that your father has never had an empathetic or altruistic thought in his entire life. And he doesn't have any feelings towards you.
And she completely disagreed with that.
Dr. Phil, who, despite the fact, yes, he's a celebrity, he was a licensed practicing doctor, psychologist. Mm-hmm. He does have a laundry list of... things that his name, but
I mean, we don't always get it right.
We don't always get it right.
People are human.
And I don't think it is as narrow as you can have these murderous things that you do and also zero emotions whatsoever and zero loving whatsoever.
Right.
I think some people that are on that spectrum can behave that way.
Oh, of course.
But
we know there are people that behave that way.
Yeah. I think this is a very early example of somebody with APD.
You know what, though? He's not our first king killer, actually. H.H. Holmes would have been.
Yes, that is true. Good memory.
But this is 2 out of the
many that we've done, 3 seasons worth.
Many female king killers.
Yes, not so much on the male spectrum. Now, there was that comment where he said that when he was drunk, he would want to kill. Mm-hmm. It reminds me a lot of, like, there's some dudes that just want to fight when they get drunk.
Yeah, I mean, he was killing specifically to steal money.
Yeah.
He
discovered when he was fighting in the Civil War that he could actually, the reason why he was stripping his victim of clothes.
Because he could make money.
He could make money off of that. Every step of the way, he was thinking about the monetary gain. Mm-hmm. Somebody that was so far gone with alcoholism that they're murdering people.
To make a couple bucks.
To buy alcohol. That's a new low, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Palate cleanser, this is the palate cleanser.
What do you call a male Black Widow?
Ooh, a male Black Widow.
You know it. You do know it. You're going to be so mad whenever you hear it. It's very piratey.
I don't know.
A Bluebeard.
Fuck!
I knew you it.
Bitch. All right.
Ted Bundy was consulted on the case of a fellow killer. Mm-hmm. Which one?
Is it Ramirez? No.
Do you remember hearing him talking about, this is one of the ways they got him to confess some of his crimes too.
See,
because they approached him from the psychology perspective because he was a psychologist.
I know. I haven't learned like in-depth stuff on Bundy because he's so overdone.
Yeah.
So no.
It was the Green River Killer.
Oh, you know what? I have heard that. Damn.
And it was actually really fascinating how they did it because they could not get Bundy to make any sort of confession about himself.
Right.
But because he was part of academia.
And he thought he was so smart.
Yes. They asked for his advice and to kind of draw a picture of what the Green River Killer would be like. And instantly, Bundy was talking out the ass. And in some ways, he was kind of describing himself. It was really, really interesting.
Huh.
So I'm glad I randomly stumbled across that one. That was a good one.
Normally, I do much better with these serial killer
I know,
trivia.
you're very good at this.
Off my game.
Oh, we talked about him. I don't know if you're going to remember this one. What was the nickname given to serial killer Albert Fish at the orphanage where he grew up?
Wasn't it Hambone? No.
Oh, you're so close.
Ham something.
You're so close. Think of Dr. Seuss. It's right there. I can see the wheels.
Is it ham and eggs?
Yes.
Ham and eggs?
It
Yeah.
is ham and eggs.
I'm like, it's ham. Ham something.
He went by Ham and Eggs because remember he was trying to use his deceased brother's name?
Right.
Yeah. Hamilton.
Fucking weird.
Yeah.
That was a weird motherfucker.
I think I asked you this one before, but I could be wrong. And it's been a while anyways. Who was the giggling granny who poisoned 4 husbands across 4 states?
Nanny Doss.
Nana Doss.
We covered her. That crazy bitch.
Oh, okay. So this one is reminiscent of my childhood.
Oh.
When my grandma and I used to watch Forensic Files when I was like 6.
Oh, Betty.
Oh, Betty. Bonding. What murders forever changed the way over-the-counter painkillers were sold?
The Tylenol murders.
Yes. Do you remember them? Because I remember them.
I do not remember them. I have very little memory of my childhood. You know this.
Well, it happened before both you or I were born, but it was still like I think it's still unsolved. I could be wrong.
I don't think they ever solved it. No.
Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We are on Twitch at The Killer T, by the way.
Yes.
We have not got that all set up yet, but our plan is to eventually live stream some fun things. So look for us on Twitch and add us. That seems a little bit easier for us to do than TikTok-y.
We would really love to do TikTok, and maybe one day we'll get there, but right now we're just too busy.
Twitch sounds like the plan.
Maybe we'll get some like cool serial killer documentaries and we'll watch them and live react.
That sounds like a plan to me. So, at The Killer T, leave comments, leave reviews, 5 stars because you love us, that whole shebang. And until next time,
Bye! Join us in the next episode where we discuss Delfina and Maria de Jesus Gonzalez.
Las Poquiantes.
I said that wrong.
it's fine.
No, pretty close. Close enough. It's fine.
Listen, if we get stuck, we're gonna phone a friend and Melanie's doing the fucking Spanish episode with us. Bye! Yeah, but that was a big thing. Checking Halloween candy and checking pharmaceuticals.
No one's putting drugs in your kids' Halloween candy.
Nobody wants to put expensive drugs. Stop checking your kids' candy cups.
I mean, I still check it because some people are eating needles and shit in it. So I still like do like a little looky-loo, but I'm not looking for drugs.
I ever wonder if your parents are like, stuff?
My dad probably did. Are you kidding me?
I remember my mom telling me that she had to check my candy first, and it would always come back without the caramel juice.
Damn it, Ginger.
That's the candy tax.
My dad used to take a candy tax too. And to be fair, Sean always tells the kids, candy tax.
Fucking assholes abundant here.